Have you ever imagined a real-life monster, one who isn't part of a fairy tale or a horror movie? A being whose name strikes terror into the hearts of anyone who hears it. A person who didn't just kill, but drank the blood of their innocent victims. A being whose brutality didn't only leave the victims terrified, but shocked an entire nation. This is the chilling story of one such man, a man who became infamous for his horrifying actions. In early 20th century Germany, he was a man whose actions defied logic, humanity, and sanity. His name was Peter Kürten, also known as the Vampire of Düsseldorf. Between 1913 and 1930, this sadistic killer terrorized the city of Düsseldorf, committing a series of gruesome murders and attacks that shook the nation to its core. But Peter Kürten wasn't the only one. Another man, Fritz Haarmann, also known as the Vampire of Hanover, would emerge in a similar dark story that would haunt Germany for decades. Haarmann's reign of terror in the 1920s was marked by unspeakable brutality, and his actions were as horrifying as those of Kürten, if not worse. Both of these men were responsible for some of the most horrifying murders in German history, and what made them even more terrifying was their tendency to commit their gruesome acts with shocking methods that involved drinking the blood of their victims, just like the creatures of the night that we read about in myths. But these were no mythical monsters. These were real men who lived among society, blending in with normal people, hiding their true nature behind the facade of everyday life. But once the darkness inside them was unleashed, the world would never be the same. In this video, we're diving deep into the twisted minds of Peter Kürten and Fritz Haarmann, uncovering their crimes, the horror they unleashed on Germany, and the chilling details of their actions. We'll explore how these men became the vampires of Germany, and how their terrifying spree of killings brought a nation to its knees. Buckle up, because this is not a story for the faint of heart. This is the horrifying tale of real-life monsters, the men who became synonymous with fear in Germany. Part 1. Peter Kürten, the Vampire of Düsseldorf. In the dark recesses of early 20th century Germany, one man's name became synonymous with fear and horror: Peter Kürten. Born on May 26, 1883, in the city of Düsseldorf, Kürten would go on to become one of the most notorious serial killers in history. His name would be forever etched in the annals of crime for his savage killings, many of which involved the macabre act of drinking his victims' blood. As chilling as any monster from folklore, Kürten's reign of terror lasted nearly 2 decades, leaving behind a trail of mutilated bodies in a nation paralyzed by fear. Early life. The making of a monster. Peter Kürten's early life was one marked by cruelty, neglect, and abuse. His childhood, like many of the world's most infamous criminals, was deeply troubled. His father was a violent alcoholic who frequently beat him and his siblings. Kürten's mother was an indifferent figure in his life, unable to shield him from his father's brutality. It is often said that a traumatic childhood can shape a person's future, and for Peter, this could not have been more true. From an early age, Kürten displayed disturbing behavior. At just 5 years old, he began engaging in acts of animal cruelty, which is often seen as a precursor to more violent behavior in later life. He was reportedly known to kill small animals, such as cats and dogs, for the sheer enjoyment of watching them suffer. This sadistic tendency would grow over the years, as he would later go on to commit his first human murder at the age of 2. As a young man, Kürten joined the German army, but his life took a dark turn when he was arrested for his first known criminal act, the brutal assault of a woman. This was just the beginning of his twisted path, one that would soon lead him to become one of Germany's most infamous serial killers. The first killings, a taste for blood. Kürten's first known murder occurred in 1913. At this time, he had already begun to experiment with violence and sexual assault. He attacked a woman in the woods, stabbing her and drinking her blood. While this may seem like an act of pure madness, it was only the beginning of a pattern that would define his later crimes. Over the next few years, Kürten's violent tendencies escalated. His killings were characterized by an almost ritualistic obsession with blood. He was not content with merely ending his victims' lives. He sought to drink their blood, an act that would later earn him the moniker the Vampire of Düsseldorf. His need for blood wasn't driven solely by sexual lust or the thrill of murder. For Kürten, it seemed to be a psychological necessity, a compulsion that he could not resist. By the time he committed his first murder, Kürten had already been involved in numerous criminal activities, including theft and assault. He was a man with little regard for human life, and his victims were merely pawns in his twisted game. His criminal record only seemed to grow with each passing year, but it was not until 1929 that the full extent of his depravity would be revealed. The Düsseldorf murders, a city in terror. It was during the late 1920s that Peter Kürten truly earned his place in history as one of the most terrifying serial killers the world has ever seen. Over a period of several years, he committed a series of brutal murders that would haunt the city of Düsseldorf and its residents. His first known murder during this period occurred in 1929, when he killed a young woman named Dora, stabbing her repeatedly and drinking her blood. This marked the beginning of a spree of killings that would claim the lives of many more innocent victims, both men and women, but primarily young girls. Kürten's modus operandi was chillingly consistent. He would often attack at night, stalking his victims in the quiet streets of Düsseldorf. His victims were usually women or children, and his method of killing was both brutal and sadistic. He would typically stab them with a knife, often inflicting wounds on the throat, and then drink their blood. Some victims were found in alleyways or isolated locations, their bodies mutilated and drained of blood, while others were left in public places to send a message of terror. What made Kürten even more frightening was his ability to elude capture for so long. He was not just a mindless killer, he was a manipulator, a man who knew how to avoid the law. He frequently changed his appearance, adopted new identities, and used his knowledge of the city to stay one step ahead of the police. At times, he even returned to the scenes of his crimes, watching the police and enjoying the terror that he had instilled in the city. Despite the growing body count, the police were struggling to find any solid leads. The people of Düsseldorf lived in constant fear, unsure of when or where the next murder would take place. Kürten's reign of terror had taken hold of the city, and it seemed as though he would never be caught. The capture and confession in 1930. After several years of brutal killings, Peter Kürten's luck finally ran out. He was arrested after a dramatic series of events, and his capture marked the end of one of Germany's most terrifying killing sprees. The investigation into the Düsseldorf murders had been long and fruitless, but it was a breakthrough in 1930 that finally led to his downfall. Kürten's arrest came when he was identified as a suspect in the murder of a young girl. His odd behavior, combined with the mounting evidence, led to his eventual confession. In a chilling series of interviews with the police, Kürten admitted to killing at least 9 people, though he claimed to have committed many more crimes that were never discovered. His confession was both horrifying and revealing. Kürten admitted to his insatiable desire for blood, and he described the thrill he experienced during each murder. He claimed that he found the act of killing to be sexually gratifying, and that drinking the blood of his victims gave him a sense of power and control. He even confessed to a disturbing ritual after killing his victims. He would sometimes return to the scene of the crime to witness the police investigation and the public's reaction to his work. Peter Kürten's confession was a chilling glimpse into the mind of a monster. He spoke of his need for blood and violence in the same way someone might discuss a craving for food. His ability to manipulate the situation and his complete lack of remorse made him one of the most dangerous serial killers in history. The trial and execution. After his arrest, Peter Kürten was put on trial for the brutal murders he had committed. The trial was a highly publicized affair, with the details of his crimes shocking the German public. Kürten's defense team argued that he was insane and that he should not be held fully responsible for his actions, but the prosecution was determined to see justice done. On April 2, 1931, Peter Kürten was found guilty of 9 murders and sentenced to death. His execution by guillotine took place on July 2, 1931, in Cologne. The vampire of Düsseldorf had finally met his end, but his legacy as one of the most notorious serial killers in history lived on. Kürten's crimes had a lasting impact on the city of Düsseldorf and on the world. His name became synonymous with terror, and his brutal killings were studied by criminologists and psychologists for years to come. He had been a monster who stalked the streets, drinking the blood of his victims in a horrifying display of power and sadism. Conclusion: Peter Kürten's story is one of the most disturbing and chilling tales in the history of crime. His gruesome murders, his sadistic enjoyment of killing, and his ability to manipulate those around him made him a true monster in every sense of the word. The city of Düsseldorf, forever haunted by his actions, will never forget the reign of terror that lasted from 1913 to 1930. But Kürten's story is just one chapter in the history of serial killers, and the world would soon learn that there were others like him, monsters hiding in plain sight, waiting to strike. As we continue to explore the darkest corners of human nature, we are reminded that the line between man and monster is often much thinner than we would like to believe. This first part delves deep into Peter Kürten's early life, crimes, and eventual capture, providing a detailed and chilling account of the vampire of Düsseldorf. It sets the stage for understanding his motivations, methods, and the lasting impact his crimes had on the world. Part 2. Fritz Haarmann, the vampire of Hanover. While Peter Kürten's horrific acts in Düsseldorf sent shivers down the spine of Germany, another man, just as brutal and terrifying, was committing his own series of murders in Hanover. Fritz Haarmann, known as the Vampire of Hanover, would go on to become one of the most infamous serial killers in German history, operating between 1918 and 1924. Haarmann's reign of terror over Hanover was marked by sadistic brutality, and his method of killing was just as chilling as that of Kürten. Unlike Kürten, however, Haarmann's motives and methods were disturbingly intimate and systematic, adding an even darker layer to his already twisted crimes. Early life, a troubled past. Fritz Haarmann was born on October 25, 1879, in Hanover, Germany. His early life, much like Peter Kürten's, was characterized by dysfunction and trauma. Haarmann grew up in a broken home with a harsh and abusive father. His father was an alcoholic who frequently mistreated him and his siblings, setting the stage for a lifetime of emotional instability and violent tendencies. Haarmann's criminal behavior started early. As a teenager, he was involved in various petty crimes, and by the time he was an adult, he had already been arrested multiple times for offenses ranging from theft to assault. Despite his criminal history, Haarmann managed to hold a variety of jobs, including work as a tailor and a laborer. But his dark inclinations were never far from the surface. Haarmann's sexual orientation and his troubled relationship with his own identity played a significant role in his later crimes. He had a disturbing attraction to young men, particularly those on the fringes of society. It's believed that this sexual frustration, combined with his deep-seated hatred for authority and societal norms, drove him to commit his gruesome murders. The crimes began. A sadistic hunger. Haarmann's killing spree began in 1918, shortly after World War I, in a time when Germany was struggling with political instability, economic hardship, and social unrest. The war had left many young men displaced, and Hanover became a place where lost souls, many of them homeless and destitute, wandered the streets. This is where Haarmann's terrifying habit began. He began luring young men, particularly runaways, and those looking for work, into his apartment under the guise of offering them shelter or employment. Once he had his victims in his grasp, Haarmann would sexually assault them before murdering them. His method of killing was as shocking as it was personal. Haarmann would often bite his victims on the throat, an act he claimed was a form of control. He would then strangle them and mutilate their bodies in horrific ways. Haarmann's signature was his tendency to bite into the victims' throats, earning him the vampire moniker. He later disposed of the bodies, often dismembering them and throwing parts into the Lean River, hiding the evidence from the police. While many of his victims were killed inside his own apartment, some were even found in public spaces, further showing his brazenness. What made Haarmann's crimes even more disturbing was the complete lack of remorse. He viewed his victims as disposable objects, mere playthings to satiate his dark desires. His victims were young, mostly between the ages of 16 and 22, and many had been taken off the streets by Haarmann under the pretense of offering them work or shelter. This false sense of security was part of what made his crimes so effective. They were not random acts of violence, but well-planned traps for the most vulnerable individuals in society. The Hanover vampire, a city in fear. Haarmann's murders continued throughout the years, with no one being able to link the deaths together. The police were baffled. The bodies of several young men were discovered over the course of 6 years, but no clear connection was made, until the sheer volume of disappearances became impossible to ignore. There were no immediate witnesses, and the bodies were often so badly disfigured or dissolved in the river that it was difficult to determine the exact cause of death. However, Haarmann was known to the police. His violent past and his tendency to prey on young men raised suspicions, but he was never apprehended due to a combination of his cunning and a lack of concrete evidence. That all changed in 1924, when a breakthrough finally came. Haarmann's capture was a result of his carelessness. After one of his victims managed to escape, he revealed crucial details to the authorities that led to Haarmann's arrest. The victim, who had narrowly escaped Haarmann's grasp, was able to identify the killer and provide the police with the details they needed to track him down. Once Haarmann was arrested, the full scope of his crimes came to light. During the interrogation, Haarmann confessed to the murders, admitting to having killed at least 24 victims, though some reports suggest that the number could be as high as 27 or more. His confession was chilling in its detail and brutality. He described each murder as if it were a casual matter, devoid of remorse. He justified his actions with disturbing rationalizations, claiming that the act of killing was a necessary part of his life. He even spoke of his need to consume his victims in a metaphorical sense, much like a vampire who feeds on blood. The trial, a shocking revelation. Haarmann's trial in 1925 was one of the most sensational publicized in Germany's history. His confession, along with the evidence found in his apartment, bones, clothes, and personal belongings of the victims, sealed his fate. The details of his crimes were so horrific that they shocked the public and garnered widespread attention. For the people of Hanover, Haarmann had become the embodiment of evil, a monster hidden in plain sight. At his trial, Haarmann was sentenced to death. The evidence was overwhelming, and his demeanor in court only added to the grotesque image of him as a remorseless killer. His trial became a media sensation, and the term vampire of Hanover became infamous. Despite his horrifying actions, Haarmann never showed remorse for his victims. He was described as calm and detached, even during his execution in April 1925. Haarmann was executed by guillotine. His death marked the end of his reign of terror, but the scar he left on Germany, particularly in Hanover, would never be erased. His case became a landmark in criminal psychology, as experts tried to understand what could drive a person to commit such brutal, unfeeling acts of violence. Legacy, a horrifying footprint story of Fritz Haarmann, is one of the darkest chapters in criminal history. His murders, his sadistic methods, and his complete lack of empathy for his victims make him one of the most disturbing serial killers the world has ever known. In the years following his execution, Haarmann became the subject of countless studies on criminal psychology and the pathology of serial killers. His case, along with Peter Kürten's, serves as a reminder of the darkest aspects of human nature. Haarmann's vampiric tendencies were not limited to his actions, but reflected a deeper, more disturbing desire to control and dominate those weaker than him. His acts of cruelty continue to be a source of fascination and fear to this day. Conclusion. A part of Fritz Haarmann's case stands as one of the most brutal in history, reflecting the depths of human depravity that few can comprehend. His sadistic killings, combined with his chilling confession, serve as a reminder of the dark potential that exists in the world. Together with Peter Kürten, Haarmann formed part of a horrifying legacy in Germany's criminal history, a legacy that will forever be associated with bloodthirsty monsters who preyed upon the most vulnerable members of society. As we look back at the horrific reign of Fritz Haarmann, we are left wondering, what drove him to commit such terrible acts? And more importantly, how do we prevent such monsters from emerging in the future? This second part dives deeper into the terrifying actions of Fritz Haarmann, his background, methods, and the psychological factors behind his brutal killings. His case, like that of Peter Kürten, remains one of the most haunting in criminal history. Part 3. The aftermath and legacy of the vampire killer's tales of Peter Kürten and Fritz Haarmann continue to haunt the streets of Germany even today, echoing the chilling terror they inflicted on an unsuspecting public. Their names are forever etched in the annals of crime, representing the darkest extremes of human depravity. But what remains after such horrendous acts? How does a society, reeling from such monstrous crimes, heal from the scars left by these vampires? The societal impact, Germany's trauma for the residents of Düsseldorf and Hanover. The killings committed by Kürten and Haarmann were not just crimes, they were an assault on the very fabric of society. These men were not faceless strangers lurking in the shadows, they were part of the community. Their ability to blend in while committing such heinous acts was deeply unsettling, shaking the foundations of trust within the public. The fear these killers instilled went beyond the terror of the crimes themselves. It was the unsettling realization that the true monsters were not always visible, and they could be anyone. They could be a neighbor, a family member, or even someone who had lived among you for years. This awareness permeated the atmosphere of Germany in the years following the trials. With a pervasive sense of anxiety taking root in everyday life, authorities, faced with these shocking revelations, were forced to examine how such killers could operate undetected for so long. The failure to capture both Kürten and Haarmann earlier in their killing sprees led to widespread calls for reforms in police practices, forensic investigation, and the management of criminal behavior. It prompted significant changes in how criminal investigations were conducted and highlighted the need for greater focus on psychological profiling and understanding the minds of serial killers. Psychological legacy, the study of the killer mind. Crimes of Peter Kürten and Fritz Haarmann would go on to serve as crucial case studies for criminal psychologists and criminologists for years to come. Their psychological profiles were deeply examined in an attempt to understand the motivations behind their gruesome actions. Both men exhibited traits of sadism and a disturbing lack of empathy, finding pleasure in the suffering of others. Kürten's chilling confession about his need to drink his victim's blood, his description of the rush he felt while committing the murders, made him a textbook case for those studying the psychology of serial killers. Haarmann's gruesome method of biting his victims' throats and his detachment during the murders revealed the deeply ingrained sadism and emotional detachment that drives such killers. Both killers found the act of murder not only physically satisfying but emotionally and sexually gratifying, making their crimes especially terrifying. Through the years, both Kürten and Haarmann became focal points in the study of criminal pathology. Their cases helped shape modern criminology, influencing the way law enforcement understood the motivations behind serial killings. Their legacy endures as a stark reminder of the darkness that can exist in the human psyche. A dark chapter closed. The final verdicts trials of both Peter Kürten and Fritz Haarmann were public spectacles. As the two men faced justice, their chilling confessions and the grotesque nature of their crimes captivated the world. Kürten, known as the Vampire of Düsseldorf, was sentenced to death and executed by guillotine on July 2, 1931, after confessing to over 70 murders. His execution marked the end of his reign of terror, But his horrific legacy would continue to haunt Germany for years to come. Similarly, Haarmann, whose killings were largely carried out in the streets and neighborhoods of Hanover, was arrested and tried for the murder of at least 24 young men. He too was sentenced to death, and his execution by guillotine on April 15, 1925, ended the terror he had inflicted on the city. But just like Kürten, Haarmann's crimes would never be forgotten, his name forever associated with terror. Their executions provided a sense of closure to the people of Germany, but the damage was done. The specter of these two monstrous men and the fear they instilled in the public would be felt long after their deaths. The ongoing legacy, a cautionary tale names of Peter Kürten and Fritz Haarmann, continue to reverberate throughout history, not just in the annals of true crime, but in the broader cultural consciousness. Their stories have been the subject of numerous books, films, and documentaries, each attempting to unravel the psychology behind their twisted deeds. But beyond the fascination with their crimes, their legacy serves as a chilling reminder of the potential darkness that exists within some individuals. It underscores the need for vigilance, awareness, and a deeper understanding of human nature in the prevention of such atrocities. These killers were not born overnight. They were products of their environment, shaped by childhood trauma, neglect, and emotional isolation. Understanding their psychology has become crucial in the fight against serial killers and other forms of violent crime. The public reaction to their crimes also brought about changes in how the legal and criminal justice systems view offenders like Kürten and Haarmann. Their crimes sparked greater focus on the treatment of mental illness, the importance of criminal profiling, and the role of law enforcement in identifying and stopping serial killers before they could strike again. Thank you for joining us in this chilling journey into the minds of two of history's most terrifying serial killers. If you found their story as haunting and unsettling as we did, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Room 57 for more deep dives into the darkest corners of true crime. We want to hear your thoughts. What do you think drove Peter Kürten and Fritz Haarmann to commit such horrific acts? How do you think society should respond to individuals like them? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're interested in more true crime stories, criminal psychology, and the real-life monsters that walk among us, don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode of Room 57. Stay curious, stay informed, and always be aware of the darkness that can lie beneath the surface of human nature. This section wraps up the story of Peter Kürten and Fritz Haarmann, offering both a conclusion and a reflection on their legacy, as well as providing a compelling call to action to engage the audience and encourage further interaction with the channel.